I've always been a straightforward guy who values hard work and loyalty. My parents taught me honesty and perseverance. My dad built his accounting practice from scratch, and my mom was a dedicated school teacher. They set a high standard for me. When I met Jillian, we connected instantly at a friend's barbecue despite her recent breakup. Our conversations flowed easily. Over time, our friendship grew into love. 2 years later, we married, and I thought our life was perfect. Some days are tough, like when you oversleep, rush out the door, and everything spirals into chaos. Today started just like that, and it only got worse. Jillian and I have been together for nearly 5 years. We met at a barbecue hosted by friends. She was going through a tough breakup, and our friends thought I might help her move on initially. We were a bit hesitant at first, but we eventually formed a genuine friendship. 6 months later, I asked her out, and 2 years after meeting, I proposed. I was thrilled when she said yes, believing our bond was unbreakable. That was until tonight. "Greg," Jillian asked as I polished my shoes, "should I wear black or beige heels tonight?" "You look good in both, but the black ones show off your calves more." Jillian loved dressing up, but often struggled with fashion. I liked that she sought my advice after a busy day dealing with a difficult audit at work. I was tired and frustrated. Jillian had been excited about her high school reunion all week, seemingly ignoring my fatigue in the past. She would comfort me, but this week she was focused. I tried to be happy for her at the reunion, but I felt neglected. Jillian was quickly surrounded by her friends, leaving me alone at dinner. I sat with our friends Lena and Mark, but I barely participated in the conversation. Jillian seemed happy, but she hardly spoke to me. I noticed odd glances from others as dinner ended. Jillian and Lena disappeared for a long time. And everyone was ready to move to the club for more drinks and dancing. "What's going on, Mark?" I asked, approaching my friend when Jillian and Lena didn't return. "Sorry, Greg," Mark said, flinching as I touched his shoulder. "I'm not sure what you mean." I gave him an incredulous look. "Mark, seriously," I stopped when I saw Lena return alone, avoiding my gaze. "Come on, Mark." "Lena, where's Jillian?" I asked Lena, who seemed upset. She hesitated, then glanced at Mark. She looked around, struggling to find the words. "Sorry, Greg," she said. "She's with the band heading to the club without telling me. Her husband." I was getting angry. "What aren't you telling me?" They avoided my gaze. I was frustrated. I rushed to the club, driving faster than usual. I arrived in minutes. Inside, I saw Jillian dancing closely with. I was disappointed to see that another guy was there. People from the reunion watched with pity. Lena touched my shoulder, startling me. She explained that Jillian's first love was Troy. They grew up together and dated through high school. He got a scholarship and they broke up when he left. I watched them dance, feeling betrayed. Lena continued, "He's been back for a few months. He transferred with his job. They don't. They seem really broken up." I muttered. Lena added that they meant to be together. "Greg," her voice held a mix of emotions as the song ended. Troy kissed Jillian. My anger peaked as I clenched my fists, drawing blood. Jillian noticed me and approached, leaving Troy behind. Troy was my first love. "Greg, we promised to reunite when he came back," she said bluntly. "So you reunited?" I replied sarcastically. Jillian scolded, "Don't be like that." She added, "Troy and I are meant to be together. We're married." I replied, "I'm sorry, Greg, but we need to divorce Troy. I have a deeper connection with him." People were staring, and an enforcer approached Greg. "You've never been," she trailed off. "I love you, but our love isn't like mine with Troy." Troy joined us, putting his arm around Jillian. "You must be Greg," he said. With a fake concerned tone, Gregory said, "I understand." "You're upset," he replied. "We've been together since I got back. She's divorcing you." Jillian turned pale, hoping it wouldn't come out. She was trying to realize his mistake. Troy pushed Jillian behind him, ready to defend her. "I'm sorry you found out this way," Troy said, trying to sound conciliatory. "Maybe it's for the best." "Jillian," he said. "He said you've been a great husband. It would be nice if we could all be friends since we share so many mutual friends." "Not for long," I said, looking at Jillian before turning back to Troy. He piled on and tried to respond, but I spoke first, so let me get this straight, I said, suppressing my growing anger. The music stopped and everyone turned to listen. "You two had true love, then Troy moved. Jillian and I met, fell in love and got married. Now Troy's back and you two have rekindled your relationship behind my back. Clearly everyone else knew, and now I'm humiliated. Greg, it wasn't supposed to be like this." Jillian started it. I shouted, "You've ignored me all week, dragged me here and then left me. You left without telling me just so I'd catch you here. Hey, Troy." I tried to get him to stop, but he didn't listen. I told him to stay out of it. He knows we've been seeing each other for months. He should mind his own business. Troy said, "Look, we're sorry you got hurt, but she loves me and we're going to get married. You and she need a divorce." I replied, "I don't think that's the best idea. I'm sorry, but this is the best way to handle it. It will hurt, but it's for the best." She paused, trying to read my mood. "It's Gregory, not Greg," she corrected herself. "I know you're hurting, but we're still young. You'll find someone else." My eye twitched, making her pale even more. "Gregory, I think it's best if you leave. You're just the third wheel." I smiled, and half the room looked at me questioningly. "On that, we agree." He smiled, thinking I understood now that it's out in the open. "Jillian and I will stay away from your house this weekend and next week so you can move out." "Move out?" I asked, tilting my head. "Well, it's Jillian's house," Troy said. "I see," I replied, narrowing my eyes. "Gregory, my soon-tobe my wife said we thought it would be easier for you. The house is perfect for Troy and me to have kids. It's too big for you." "I see." I repeated the last syllable, hissing. The silence stretched on until the DJ resumed the music. No one started dancing. Everyone watched to see what would happen. Troy spoke loudly. "I'm sorry, Gregory, but this is the situation. I know it's hard, but—" He held out his hand. I stared at it, then back at him. He quickly withdrew his hand, deciding it was time to leave. I turned and walked out, and no one stopped me. The bouncers opened the doors and the noise from inside died down. One of the bouncers asked, "Are you okay?" I replied, "No, not really. We could wait a few minutes before pulling you out for the first time all day." I laughed. The bouncers smirked. "I don't need a night in the gatehouse." Both nodded. "I've seen some nasty breakups, but this is one of the coldest." The first bouncer said, "I'm sorry." I waved off the sympathy. "Don't worry about it. I'll just go home and change the locks." The second bouncer, I raised an eyebrow and smiled. We talked a bit more before I shook their hands and left. On the way home, I stopped at a hardware store. It was late, but I quickly bought new locks, deadbolts, moving boxes, and packing tape. Once home, I changed the locks and started packing. A few hours later, exhausted and feeling utterly abandoned, I sat down with a Kraken and a soda. I opened my laptop. I canceled our joint credit cards, opened a new account, and transferred half of our joint savings. I also found our legal folder with house deeds, investment properties, and our prenuptial agreement. While it didn't cover infidelity, it protected my business assets. I slept fitfully, but managed a few hours in the morning. I found a cafe and enjoyed a fusion breakfast while there. I drafted a letter to a lawyer. I told a friend what had happened. He was shocked, but said he'd file the divorce papers on Monday and put me in touch with someone who could help when I got home. Mark and Lena were waiting in the driveway. I parked on the curve and Lena started, "Greg." I raised my hand to stop her. "It's Gregory. Only friends can call me Greg." "Excuse me," Lena said. "My name is Lena." "Listen, buddy," Mark began, trying to be conciliatory. "We're sorry about last night." I didn't raise my hand again to silence him. I looked at a tree across the road. One of its limbs had been torn off by a storm. It made me think of my situation. Losing Jillian felt like losing a limb. Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to Mark and Lena. "Don't you dare make excuses," I said. "You've known Jillian has been cheating for months. You said nothing. But Gregory." Lena started to explain that she'd interrupted the love story. She said that real love doesn't betray and humiliate. She said that she thought what Jillian and I had was true love. She said that she'd never doubted Jillian and that she'd worshipped her. She said that she would have given her everything. I interrupted and said, "Lena, I'm sorry, but Jillian and Troy, stop." I spent the last 7 years supporting Jillian through her struggles, encouraging her growth, enduring severe period pains, family planning, and talking about growing old together. I was only her plan B. Why does Troy get to come back and take everything I worked for? They looked at me like I didn't understand. I continued my pain and anguish, bursting out, "He gets all my efforts." I helped rebuild a woman and all her friends who betrayed me. Well, they looked ashamed, so I said, "Get off my property." Mark tried to interject, but Greg just glared at him. "I get it. You thought Jillian and I would be happy forever, but Troy is back, and they deserve to be happy. What about me?" I asked if they had any answer to my question about my happiness. I told them that I deserve a faithful wife and friends who care. I don't need your pity. If I seem bitter, it's because I am. Put yourself in my shoes. I said to Mark, "When Lena leaves you for her true love, you'll understand." Mark tightened his grip on Lena's arm, silencing her. He said, "We're leaving, but is there anything we can do?" I looked at their minivan and said, "Wait here." I brought out several boxes of Jillian's things and threw them in front of them. Some of the fragile items shattered. "Take these to Jillian's new place," I told them, "but Jillian said she needs the house and that you're going to move." Lena said. I laughed. It's not her house. Just tell her not to come back. Everything that belongs to her is in these boxes. My lawyers will send the divorce papers on Monday. You didn't even think to stop her. Lena started fighting. No, she's in love with him. She cheated on me, and she's been lying for years. She gets what she deserves. I watched them They loaded the boxes into their van and drove away. They didn't realize they'd lost my friendship, but I wasn't there to see their remorse that night. I got drunk and cried. I trashed the living room in my rage, breaking a vase from our first wedding anniversary and smashing furniture. I punched holes in the hallway walls and ripped. I woke up with a hangover, a headache, bloody knuckles, possibly a broken hand and scratches all over. I bandaged myself up and knew I'd need to see a doctor. The living room was destroyed, the hallway walls were damaged, and the kitchen was a mess. I remembered the twisted. I took some Panadol and had a big gulp after half an hour. The throbbing subsided. I moved to the living room and sat on the floor between broken chairs, staring at the cracked TV. The day passed in a blur. I went to the doctor, who found hairline fractures in both arms and bandaged them. I ignored messages from people, including Mark and Lena, that night. I went to bed without recalling much of the day except for the TV and doctor visit. Monday morning I went to the office, checked emails and prepared for a 9. I'm up at 0 a.m. I had a team meeting with my receptionist, Colleen. She saw my bandages and sat down. She asked how my weekend had been. I sighed and turned to her. I told her about Jillian dumping me for her true love. Colleen was shocked. She asked if it was true. I nodded and raised my hands, which were bandaged. My eyes were watering. At the reunion, everyone knew that Jillian had been cheating with Troy. They ambushed me. On Friday night, I finally let myself cry on Colleen's shoulder. I told her about how I'd smashed up the furniture in a drunken rage, and how I'd ended up at the doctor's the next morning. Once we'd dried our eyes, we headed into the meeting room. Colleen led the team in, and I said, "Hope everyone had a good weekend." I then began, but Colleen, I was interrupted. "Sorry, Gregory, but you can't pretend everything is normal after what happened." I hesitated, then nodded. Colleen explained that Gregory had been betrayed by his wife and friends. Jillian had been cheating and left him in a humiliating way. She paused, looking at James. "Isn't that right, James?" James, one of Jillian's classmates, turned pale. He said. Colleen asked, "Were you there Friday night?" James replied, "Yes." Colleen pressed, "Did you know about the affair?" James lowered his gaze. The room fell silent, bristling with anger toward James. Colleen said, "You need to leave and think about your future here. If we find you supported Jillian, you'll be dismissed." I swallowed and stood up. "I understand," he said, leaving the room quietly. No one spoke for the most part. I'd forgotten that James had been in the room on Friday. I hardly noticed anyone except those ruining my life. I cleared my throat. "Everyone," I said, bringing us back to the present. "My personal life is a mess and my weekend wasn't pleasant. I held up my, we've got work to do and clients to serve, so let's support each other. If you need anything, just let Colleen know. I'll be here, but bear with me." I nearly cried when everyone expressed sympathy and encouragement. "One last thing, don't crucify James just yet. Let's get the whole story before blaming him." Everyone muttered, but agreed. Colleen. I then ran the rest of the meeting. After that, I went back to my office and stared out the window for a few minutes. Colleen knocked and entered with James a few minutes later. I invited them in and said, "You and James need to talk." Colleen nodded and settled into her chair. James sat across from me looking down, so I said, an accusation in my voice. At that moment, Gregory James started, and then laughed. Colleen asked if there was anything funny, but James just smiled sadly and said nothing was funny. He'd been betrayed by his boss and yelled at by his wife all day, and he might lose his job. I smiled, but it was like gallows humor or tears. James started at the beginning. He nodded and said, "You've heard how perfect Jillian and Troy were in high school." I nodded and said, "Yes." James continued, "Recently, that's all I've heard." James continued, "I was a math major, not in the popular crowd, but we all knew Jillian and Troy. They broke up before graduation when Troy went abroad, and Jillian was devastated. Then I found out Troy had a girlfriend in the States." I nodded again. I had heard Jillian's side when I helped her get back on her feet. We kissed for the first time after one of those conversations were how it was until recently. James continued, "I got my degree, married Sherry, and got a job here. I was surprised and happy to see Jillian with you, knowing Troy's departure had hurt her." James paused, and I asked, "When did you find out about their affair?" "Was it about an hour before you and Jillian showed up for dinner?" He said, "A few classmates." James mentioned that Jillian had left you for Troy, and everyone was surprised. I gave James a questioning look. He sighed before dinner. Only a few people knew what was going on, but by then everyone in the class knew that Jillian and Troy were meant to be together. Mark and Lena took Sherry and me aside and explained that they felt sorry for you, but they said you weren't. Jillian's future was no longer part of the plan. James looked pained. He was blushing and maybe even a little teary-eyed. Sorry, Gregory, but we couldn't stay for dinner. Sure wanted to be there for you, but Mark and some guys escorted us out, telling us to stay away. James, I started feeling guilty, but he raised his hand to stop me. I'm sorry, Gregory. I need to finish this. I promised. Sherry, I nodded. I was stunned. He continued. We were banned from the reunion because your wife was going to betray you. Sherry and I didn't know what to do, so we went to the club. We wanted to be there for you. What happened? I asked. I didn't see you there. We were there when you arrived, but a few guys kept us from getting to you until Jillian told you. When you left, we chased after you, but you were gone. We stood outside the club for half an hour, unsure what to do. Eventually, we went back inside. James paused, then continued. When we returned, half the class shunned us, and the other half were disgusted. They surrounded us and wouldn't let anyone near us for the rest of the evening. I prompted, and they acted. James said, like you were nothing. This was all planned for months. I heard that Jillian and Troy were getting married soon. He looked down, clenching his hands. Sher and I fought all night. We were really put off by their behavior. James pulled a piece of paper from his notebook and put it in front of me. What's this? I asked, reading James quickly signed and dated my resignation. James, I began. No, Gregory replied. What they did was wrong, and I couldn't help you. You deserve better. Sher and I agreed. I'd rather resign than have you see me and be reminded of Friday night. We sat in silence. I looked at his resignation letter and laughed. Colleen and James looked at me, and I laughed. I tore the letter in two. Your resignation is rejected, I said behind us. Colleen smiled, and James looked shocked. But Gregory, he stammered. My friends call me Greg. You tried to help me and sympathize with me. If that's not a friend, I don't know what is. James nodded. Sherry and I thought it was for the best. I know, I replied. That's why I want you both to stay. We talked for half an hour. Then Colleen, James, and I called everyone back into the... I told them in the conference room that James had been caught off guard too and was fired because of the situation. Everyone was cool about it and left with smiles on their faces. The rest of the week, I spent most of my time in the office talking to my staff and working on my divorce. I didn't end up mailing the divorce papers. Jillian filed them at work. Infidelity isn't a mandatory factor in divorce in Australia, but I made sure my lawyers, Mike and his assistant Sally, included it in the legal documents. After Jillian got the papers, I ignored her calls and texts, figuring she was just angry. I handled the bank accounts, listed the assets, checked the canceled cards and insurance. My team took care of the legal paperwork, making sure Jillian couldn't access anything. Colleen stopped by my house on Tuesday night and was shocked by the damage. By Wednesday, she'd contacted my insurance company and arranged for a damage assessment. By Friday, the appraisers and cleanup crew were on site. The cleanup crews were scheduled for the following week, but they were exhausted by Friday night. I still didn't sleep well on Saturday morning, so I went for a run. I ended up at a cafe where I enjoyed coffee and a croissant before jogging home. I was surprised to see Jillian sitting on the steps when I got back. Jillian arrived looking disheveled and dressed in mismatched clothes. Greg, it's good to see you, Jillian began. I spat out a ball of phlegm, interrupting her. What are you surprised I'm taking care of myself after you betrayed me? I was afraid you'd eliminate yourself or be a wreck. She took a step back. Jillian looked down, her expression unreadable. Greg, I never meant to hurt you, she said. Yeah, right. I said you set everything up to humiliate me in front of everyone. She looked down, her eyes narrowing. It wasn't my idea. Mark and Troy thought if we did it this way, you wouldn't resist. Greg laughed bitterly. You think I'd fight? You're out of your mind if you think I'm going to stand for this. You lost any right to my respect when you cheated. Get lost, Greg. You can't talk to me like that. I'm still your wife. When she tried to follow, I stopped her. You're not invited. But Greg, this is still my house too. She insisted. No, it isn't. It belongs to a trust and I pay rent to it. She looked confused. Jillian, this isn't your house anymore. You don't live here. Wait, I have something for you. I went inside, texted my lawyer, grabbed a few things and went back to the door. Jillian was still there. Greg, I said, raising my hand first. It's Gregory, she replied. You're not a friend. I handed her a folder and a check for half of our assets. Assets, her eyes widened. Third, she said, you have something for me. She hesitated, then pulled a manila envelope from her purse. I'm sorry, Gregory. You will be. I said, opening the envelope and reading the documents she wanted. She wanted 75% of our savings and 50% of my business, along with a restraining order. I asked, raising my eyebrows. She couldn't meet my gaze. She knew they had gone too far. I listened to Sally swear and watched Jillian turn red as she heard the divorce petition and restraining order, which includes my house, even though she no longer lives there. Sally assured me she'd handle it. I turned to Jillian and asked how it felt to be one of Jillian. She was silent for a moment. It's not like that, Greg. I convinced Troy to give you until Monday to move out so we can move in. I laughed. You can't move in, it's not your house. But you can't be here, she replied irritably. I might have shrugged, but that doesn't mean you can be here either. It's time for you to leave, Jillian. I'd wish you well, but that would be a lie. Do you hate me that much? She asked, looking at my bandaged hands. Do you seriously have the nerve to ask me that after everything I've done for you? Jillian, you said you were my best friend, and you ruined everything. I looked down. It wasn't my idea. Mark and Troy thought it would be easier this way. Now, Greg, you can't talk to me like that. I'm still your wife, I said, unlocking the door when she tried to follow. I stopped her. You're not invited, but, Greg, this is still my house too. You don't live here anymore. Wait, I have something for you. I went inside, texted my lawyer, grabbed a few things and returned. Jillian was still there. Greg, it's Gregory. Only friends call me Greg. You're not a friend. She gulped. Second, I handed her a folder. Here's a check for your half of our assets. Her eyes widened. Third, you have something for me. She pulled a manila envelope from her purse. I'm sorry, Gregory. You will be, I said. We're not friends, and your betrayal is as bad as hers. You have nothing to say that will help. I glared at Mark and Lena. You both helped set up that scene at the club to humiliate me. You're as guilty as Jillian and Troy. Lena began. Don't you? Lena, if you think that's love, you're mistaken. It's not something I'd want to encourage. They looked stunned. I stopped, then had an idea. Lena, will you forgive Mark when he comes home smelling of perfume after I was spending the night at a strip club? I smiled condescendingly. Lena looked at Mark and said, Baby, that's not true. Mark stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. I laughed and said, No, it's not true, but Mark likes to brag about special lap dances during our golf games. Lena sensed that there was more to the story. Mark took a step back, and he ran down the road with Lena chasing him, yelling. I looked at Troy, who was staring in surprise, then at Jillian with a smug grin. Greg, she said hesitantly. Gregory, you didn't have to do that. I grinned. Don't worry, Jillian. This is just the first shot Mark has taken. There's still a lot more secrets to come out, and this is just the beginning. You and Troy won't like what's coming next. What do you mean? Jillian asked. Go away, Jillian. Tell Troy to take you far away because if you stay, things will get worse for you. Greg, what's wrong with you? Where is the man I love? She asked. He's dead. You ripped my heart and soul out, and what's left is something dark. I stepped back and slammed the door, letting out a villainous chuckle. 10 minutes later, I looked outside and saw that Jill, Troy, and the truck were. I was left sitting on the floor, shaking from the confrontation and breaking down again. I loved her, but hated her too. I wanted her to feel regret. I knew she wouldn't come back, and even if she did, I couldn't accept her again. The next month was filled with lawyers, financial disclosures, and dividing assets. My staff rallied around me, and Colleen helped me find a counselor. I moved into an apartment. Colleen organized cleaning and repairs for the house, despite wanting a clean break. Jillian fought over many things. First, she claimed $155. She also tried to claim our bank accounts, but I had $20,000 in them. She also tried to claim our house and investment properties, but they were owned by a trust and unavailable to her. She fought with lawyers, likely paid by Troy, but failed. I smiled knowing she lost any return on that investment. Next, she wanted furniture and jewelry. I had her belongings packed and delivered to her, including shoes, earrings, and necklaces. She also claimed half of my business, but the prenuptial agreement laid out by Sally denied her any part of it. Jillian ended up with $10,000. I'm pretty sure she spent $10,000 on lawyers while I kept my houses in business. Sally also got Jillian to give up her wedding and engagement rings. The restraining order was lifted since Jillian had no rights to the house. The locks had been changed and a security company checked the house until I moved back in. We waited a couple of months for the divorce to finalize. James and Sherry asked everyone to Jillian and Troy moved into an apartment provided by his company. Troy was expecting a house, but he got nothing. In August, 2 weeks before the final divorce, I was busy with work. One day, I was surprised to see an entrepreneur friend waiting for me. I never thought I'd see their face again. Gregory, you have to help me. pleaded Mark, sitting at a table in. Lena was sitting next to him, looking down. It was clear that they didn't get on. I wondered if it was because of our last encounter. James was sitting next to me. We'd done taxes for Mark's import-export business for years. It was a tough job, making sure everything was correct, but we were paid well. Mark could have gone to another firm, but it would have cost him more. It took them years to understand his business. "Are you really going to make me beg?" Mark said, his voice pleading. I laughed. James smiled. "Begging would be nice, but it's not going to happen. Why are you here? You planned to humiliate me, made excuses, and didn't care about my feelings. Now you want my help?" No one spoke. "You know you were right," Lena said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lena, she looked at Mark, then back at me, and I could see anger passing over her face before turning to sadness. Mark lowered his gaze. "You were right," she said sadly. "It wasn't just about Mark's behavior, but everything. We were so caught up in Troy and Jillian's romance that we didn't think about you. We were lying to ourselves about true love. Some, like my husband, used it to cover their own cheating." I looked at the broken couple. Mark couldn't meet our eyes, and Lena was near a breakdown. "So what now?" I asked Lena G bitterly. "Now we face the consequences. We've hurt those we loved, and my marriage is on the brink. I don't know if it will survive." I looked at Mark, who remained silent. "I can't say. I'm not happy about the fact that you're both suffering. As managing partner, I've decided it's not in our best interest to continue handling your company." Mark's shoulders slumped, but I continued. Mark looked up with hope. "I can recommend 3 firms to take on your account. James has their credentials. If you're interested, let James know, and we'll just send your financial statements to them, that's all. I'm just asking for a recommendation. Are you really done with us?" "Yes," I replied, shrugging. "You ruined my marriage by supporting Jillian and Troy using terms like true love. You laughed and joked about it. Well, this is the consequence. I told them I'd complete the transfer once Mark and Lena signed the forms over the next month. 3 more clients, all Jillian's classmates who supported her infidelity, realized I wouldn't do business with them anymore. Despite losing 4 clients, I gained 6 others who didn't support what happened and wanted to help. By September, the divorce was final. I moved back into the renovated house, and my hands had healed by the time I received the divorce paperwork. Jillian called and texted me to say goodbye. "Gregory, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how to feel. The betrayal still hurt, but I knew if Jillian could leave me so easily, she wasn't the one for me." That weekend, Colleen and my team surprised me with a family barbecue at over 24 people came to my place, including Colleen, James, and Sherry. They made sure I was never alone at one point, while James manned the barbecue. Sherry sat with me and watched the kids play in my yard. I could tell she was hurting, knowing that Jillian and I would never have the children we talked about. Cher kissed my cheek and said, "Life will happen again. Greg, you'll have the support of friends and colleagues. The workers and family were there for me." Sherry gave me a hug as I cried. James, Colleen, and others offered support throughout the day. Despite feeling like a wreck, I felt comforted. The following week at work, I felt much better. The staff noticed my improved mood, and I even joked with them at the weekly meeting. I thanked everyone, especially James, Colleen, and Sherry, for their support. We gained 3 new clients, including 2 large corporations needing in-depth financial analysis. I did a deep dive into the financials. I decided to handle a forensic audit, going back to work in the evenings. I set up a routine of cooking dinner and working out, determined to rise above the betrayal. 2 weeks after the barbecue, on a Thursday night, I was cooking dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to a nervous but a beautiful blonde woman kissed me before I could speak. She pulled me down by my shirt. Her kiss was soft and minty. I kissed her back, holding her close. After an indeterminate time, we parted. I saw tears in her eyes. Before I could greet her, she slapped me. It wasn't a hard slap. I stood in shock. "I'm sorry, Gregory," she said. "That wasn't the best way to say hello," she said, her voice sultry yet firm. I tilted my head, wondering who she was. "Rebecca," I said, leaving the question unanswered. The woman smiled. Rebecca, she said, "what brings you here tonight?" I stood in silence for a moment, so I repeated the question. "You guessed right," she said. "But why did you come to see me?" I asked with a slight smile. "Why did you come to see me?" She replied. "Because you need me here." I replied, "So tell me why I need you." "I enjoy kissing a beautiful woman," she said, "but the slap confused me." She looked amused. "Do you think I'm beautiful?" I nodded and said, "Gorgeous." Her smile widened. I was captivated by this woman I had just met. "Thank you, Gregory," she said, blushing. "Does something smell nice?" she asked, sniffing the air. I sighed contentedly and opened the door, inviting her in. We chatted as I led her to the kitchen, poured her a glass of sherry, and continued cooking dinner. I quickly prepared a second plate for Rebecca, who watched me cook, holding her. I set the table, dimmed the lights, and served the food. Rebecca giggled. "Our first date, and you ordered for me. A woman likes a man who knows what he wants," I replied. Rebecca laughed, then raised her glass to Gregory, showing that even wounded, he still knows how to treat a lady. We clinked glasses and smiled. Rebecca took a bite of the dish and her eyes widened. "Gregory, this is amazing, thank you." I nodded, tasting the food. It was delicious. "So Rebecca, no more games. Who are you and what's going on?" She took another bite and a sip of wine before speaking. "First, thank you, Gregory. You handled my greeting with grace. I stood at your door for almost 20 minutes before knocking. I spent about 20 minutes nodding and sipping my wine while I thought about how to break the ice. I finally said, 'We've met before. I'm Colleen's niece.' 'Ah, Rebecca, you look very different than the last time we met.' She smiled and said, 'Destruction. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and was lost. Aunt Colleen brought me to your office after talking to my mom about getting out of my comfort zone.' I nodded, recalling the meeting. She had come to the office dressed in all black with piercings. 'He cheated on me with 3 people, 2 girls and a guy.' She said it bluntly. I choked on my wine. She said, looking into her glass, 'We were at a club. I went back to a guy's place and found them together. I ran home and cried for days. My mom convinced me to go for a walk with Aunt Colleen. That's when she brought me to your office.' I smiled. I remember Aunt Colleen introducing us. You shook my hand. You didn't look. You looked at me like I was pathetic and didn't judge me for how I was dressed or my piercings. Do you remember what you asked me?" I nodded. "I asked you what kind of coffee you wanted." Rebecca smiled and said, "Yes, mocha, with a double shot of chocolate." We said it at the same time, laughing. "You remember?" she asked. I nodded, taking another sip of wine. Her smile faded, and then there was a slap. She said, "I didn't notice you at the barbecue that day." I apologized. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. It was a rough day." She smiled. "It's okay, Gregory. I just mentally kissed you and then slapped you because you didn't notice me. I even hugged you and told you everything would be okay. But I guess you don't remember much of that day. I had a vague image of slender arms and dark blue jeans with a red blouse telling me everything would be okay. Do you remember?" she asked, sort of red top, blue jeans. Rebecca nodded. "I asked Aunt Colleen about you the other day. She said, blushing slightly, that she knew I had a crush on you and encouraged me to come." I said, "Over and talk to you." Rebecca blushed. I asked, "Did you plan to kiss me?" She said no. I said, "Well, you opened the door, so I just went for it." I smiled and took her hand. I said, "I'm glad you did. That was the best thing that's happened to me in months." She smiled, and we spent 3 hours talking. She helped me clean up dinner, and we continued. After our chat in the kitchen, I found out that she was 28, 4 years my junior, and had just graduated with a degree in finance. She liked all kinds of music, but wasn't into heavy metal anymore. After her goth phase, she got a job as a junior accountant at a manufacturing firm and loved it. She was close to her family, with parents who had been married for 30 years and my younger sister is in New Zealand. She loves the beach but has sensitive skin. She's only had 2 boyfriends, including the goth who betrayed her. We talked about our lives. I shared that I'm estranged from my mother. My father's sudden passing caused family strife. My younger sister also caused a rift by taking Jillian's comment out of context. Just to let you know, it's 0:00 a.m. Rebecca decided to leave, though we were both tempted to continue. I climbed into bed and smiled for the first time since my life had fallen apart. Rebecca's bold actions bypassed months of trying to overcome my defenses and showed me that someone could care about me romantically. The next morning, my smile was undeniable, and everyone noticed. Lunchtime, Colleen cornered me. "Spill it, Greg. Who is she?" she asked, sounding hopeful. "Rebecca came over last night." I told her. Colleen's joyous shriek echoed through the office. She made me recount everything, laughing at the kiss and the slap, Greg. "I'm so happy for you, even if nothing comes of this. Seeing you come out from under what Jillian and that, I think it's worth it, but I think there's something between you and Rebecca." We chatted a bit more, and I told Colleen that Rebecca and I had been texting all day and were having dinner on Friday night. She was really happy, and her happiness spread to everyone else. Friday night came, and I picked up Rebecca. I asked her to dress up for our first official date. She looked stunning when she opened the door. Wow. I'm batting 1,000 so far. She laughed every time we met. I couldn't even say hello, beautiful. So I said, better. We walked hand in hand to my car. When I opened the door, she stopped. Is this your car? She asked. Yeah, I said. Rebecca's jaw dropped. You're a Mustang enthusiast, she said, but not just any Mustang. I have a 1967 GT. It's classic gray with black racing stripes and a modified exhaust. I was surprised Jillian didn't try to get it in the divorce. She knew it was my pride and joy. I opened the passenger door for Rebecca, and she smiled as she settled in. When I started the car, she giggled as the V8 engine roared. We drove into town chatting about our weeks and how Colleen had high hopes for us. We had dinner at an upscale Japanese restaurant, trying various dishes and a bit of sake, which we both agreed was fun for a date, but not for regular consumption. After dinner, we made a few bets at the casino and ended up with $600 more than we started with. There was a club in the casino, so we dressed up and went in. It was an upscale club with a diverse crowd throughout the evening. Guys approached Rebecca to dance, but she politely declined each time. At one point, a guy stopped me and said, "You're a lucky guy. Your woman only has eyes for you." I asked her to dance, but she turned me down flat. He was a sturdy, good-looking guy. He was probably a personal trainer or football player. He patted my shoulder, smiled, and walked away. On Saturday morning, I woke up smiling, thinking about the night with Rebecca. We spent the weekend in bed, only getting up to bathe or get food when it was time for work. I drove Rebecca back to her apartment in her Friday night dress. By the time I got to the office, I had 2 more pictures of my girlfriend Rebecca stayed with me every night that week except Wednesday when she had to work late. One Tuesday, Greg James said, "Hey, do you have a few minutes?" He closed the door behind him. "Sure," I said, raising an eyebrow. "So, how's it going with you and Rebecca?" "Yeah," I said, grinning. "It's only been a few months, but it feels like 6. James looked worried. "Sherry and I we've been together for almost 5 years, but it feels like 10 in a good way." I held up my hand, grinning. "I get it." James nodded. "Sherry and I are happy to see you smiling again. We were wondering if you and Rebecca would like to have dinner at our place on Saturday night. I'll check with Becky, but I think we're free." Greg James continued nervously. "It's about Jillian. She died. What about her?" "Do you know about?" James asked about the Kensington audit. Kensington was one of the big multinationals we'd taken on, and James was leading the audit. "We found some issues," he said. "We discovered that one of their middle managers had been embezzling money for years. He used it for things like Corins and supporting a mistress and child in the U.S. The man was clever and hid the thefts. I was blown away by the scale of it. We were looking at different cost centers and projects, totaling just under $2 million. So, I said to James, for over 4 years he's been using company money to pay for Khorasan. And for the last 3 years he's been using it for child support for a woman and child overseas." James nodded. "Exactly." I tried not to smile so much, but it was hard not to. A month later, we gave Kensington the initial report but held back some of the details until we'd finished tracking the file. They were worried about internal corruption and agreed to wait for a proper investigation. We asked for another month and they said yes. 2 weeks later, I came home on Friday to find Rebecca had set up a candlelit dinner. She poured me a Kraken and soda, and we enjoyed chicken boss kawa. I noticed a box between us, but I didn't mention it after dinner. We moved to the living room with refilled drinks, the lights were dimmed, and there was soft music playing. "Greg, the last 6 months have been the best of my life," Rebecca said. "I know you were broken when we met, but so was I." She went on to say that their relationship has been amazing because they give themselves completely to each other. "I love you, Gregory, and I need you to know that before we do anything else," she said. Rebecca handed me the box. It was small, like a box for headphones, with an envelope on top. I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. It said, "Gregory, inside this box is the engagement ring you bought last week. I found it while cleaning and you were in the shower. I hope you open the box, take out the ring, and ask me to marry you. I love you so much. Sincerely and forever, Rebecca." I looked at Rebecca, who was filled with hope. "I love you too," I said as I opened the box to find the ring. I had bought it. It was a simple gold ring with a single diamond. Rebecca smiled. I never looked inside. I wanted to, but I didn't. I got down on one knee. "Rebecca Brown, you brought me back to life. Before you kissed, I thought I'd never be happy again, but you showed me how much you wanted to be mine, and I can't imagine a more perfect partner. I was planning to do this at your family barbecue, but I can't wait any longer. Rebecca Beth Brown, will you marry me?" We kissed. "Thank you, my fiancée." I told her she's going to have the most caring wife in the world. Then a minute later, the doorbell rang. I groaned but answered it. It was Colleen, Rebecca's parents, James and Sherry. "Congratulations," they all said. Rebecca wrapped her arms around me. "Sorry, babe, I wanted to celebrate." I invited a few people over for a surprise engagement party that night. She promised me she wouldn't tell anyone. We ushered everyone inside, and her parents brought 2 bottles of champagne as they handed out glasses. I tried to act offended, but I couldn't help but smile while Rebecca showed off her ring to the ladies. I got backslaps from my future father-in-law. And after that, James and I spent the evening laughing at stories about Rebecca's childhood. When everyone left, Rebecca and I headed to bed, but not before taking a few more pictures of her engagement ring. In those photos, it was the only thing she was wearing. A month later, 3 significant events happened within 48 hours. First, we delivered. I sent the completed forensic report to Kensington. They weren't happy and said heads would roll, but they agreed to wait for a thorough investigation. Rebecca came to my office with wedding ideas and legal documents. When I saw the prenup, I got upset. "Becca, this prenup leaves you with almost nothing." I said, frustrated, that it only leaves me with nothing. "If I cheat on you, which I won't, we'll split everything and your business will be safe." "Becca, I know you're trying to protect me, but the protections I already have are enough." She held my hands. "This is my promise to you. I'll only walk away with nothing if I cheat on you. Trust me." I signed the document. We discussed it several times, and in the end, she was right. It went to the file cabinet. The third event happened the next evening at home. Rebecca, who had moved in permanently, sent me to shower when I got home. I was just out of the shower when I heard screaming and throwing on shorts. I rushed out to find my ex. Jillian was yelling at Rebecca, so I moved out and he moved in. Jillian said, "You left the most loving man on this planet and broke his heart." I agree with that, but I'm Gregory's personal mistress. He gets my body freely for his exclusive use. "Could you say the same when you were married to him, Rebecca?" She stopped and Jillian shouted, "You little strumpet," and a slap echoed through the room. I hurried in, finding Jillian with a red mark on her cheek. "Rebecca," I said with a smile, "meet Jillian, my ex." "Jillian, this is Rebecca, my fiancée." They looked at each other as I stepped between them. "Jillian, do you find this amusing, Greg?" "Greg, actually, yeah. Since you weren't invited and started yelling before getting slapped, I find it funny. Maybe it's a little karma for how our life together ended." Rebecca grinned, but I held up my hand. "That's enough, Becca. What do you want?" "Jillian," I sighed. "Why did you have to ruin my life? It's been almost a year since we've had anything to do with each other. You left me for someone else, and now you're facing the consequences." Rebecca snorted from behind me. "You didn't have to destroy Troy," Jillian said mournfully. "You didn't have to do that." I laughed. "Be more specific." "Jillian, it was your forensic audit of Kensington that got Troy arrested. You didn't have to do that. I spent on CTA and a woman and child in the U.S. I asked Jillian, who was turning white, a woman and a child, if she knew anything. She said she didn't know much. I leaned forward and said, "Jillian, your true love has a woman and child in the States. He stole company money to support them. It's all in the report. Want me to send it to you?" She sank to the ground and found her world collapsing for the first time. I saw she was truly lost in everything. She thought her whole life was falling apart. Rebecca and I watched as she slumped on the porch. "He got arrested. You know, Jillian said her anger was gone, replaced by empty grief. I didn't know Troy had been arrested, but I thought the authorities were onto him. We'd been married for less than 3 months, and he spent a month of that in the States." Jillian sobbed. I felt a twinge of sympathy. I'd been married to her for years and shared many physical moments, but she was also, my tormentor was discarding me cruelly and heartlessly. "What should I do?" Jillian asked, looking at Rebecca. "You have the nerve to ask him that after what you did." Rebecca said firmly but without venom, "He was mine long before he was yours," Jillian replied. Rebecca laughed, hugging me tightly. "He was never truly yours. Jillian, you never let him into your heart completely. You must have kept part of yourself away to do what you did." "That's not true," Jillian protested. Looking at me, Rebecca laughed. "If you gave yourself completely, why did you cheat on him as soon as your true love returned? Why did you humiliate him and try to take his house, investments, and business? Is that giving yourself completely?" Jillian was silent, looking transparent and defeated. Rebecca, showing surprising compassion, sat next to her. "Jillian," Rebecca said softly, "you don't know my story. When I first met Greg, he was happily married to you. I realized from our brief conversation, I learned how much he loved you. Jillian, you surprised me when I heard what you did to him." "I was furious," Rebecca continued. But then at Greg's barbecue, when your divorce was finalized, I saw how broken he was. Even Aunt Colleen had trouble getting through to him. He was in danger of sinking into depression. My heart broke for him. Both women looked at me, Rebecca with adoration. Jillian, throughout the evening, everyone tried to comfort him. He cried openly, showing his pain. I hugged him, though he doesn't remember, and he thanked me. I realized I could help him stop his slide into bitterness and maybe find love with him. We were silent for a moment. The next week, I came here and kissed him. I slapped him when he opened the door, Rebecca said, smirking. Jillian's eyes widened. From that moment on, I belonged to him entirely. Rebecca continued. You threw away a man who could have given you the world for that. I thank you. You, my heart and soul, belong to him now. If you hadn't discarded him, I never would have had a chance. No one said anything. We were all lost in our thoughts. What am I supposed to do now? Jillian asked. I gave up everything for a dream. Rebecca shrugged. Honestly, I don't care what you do. Jillian looked surprised. You've let things get out of control, and I'm not going to let you back into Greg's life. He's mine, and you don't want to see how crazy I'll get if you try to interfere. Rebecca walked over to me. I found my voice. Jillian, I don't love you anymore. I remember loving you, but after your betrayal and Rebecca's love, there's nothing left for you. Jillian looked utterly broken. To be honest, I don't like you. You've hurt me more than anyone ever has, but I'll give you some advice. Divorce Troy and leave him before everything falls apart. He'll be in jail for a long time. Where will I go? She asked. I don't care. Maybe Mark and Lena will take you in. They're getting a divorce, Jillian said sadly. Not surprising. A cheating spouse will do that. You need to figure this out yourself. I'm not your friend. We're just people who once had something in common. Jillian asked hopefully, Is there any chance of being friends? Rebecca and I answered together, no. Over the next month, the press started reporting on Troy's arrest. Our audit that uncovered the fraud was in the news, and by the end of the year, we had nearly doubled our staff due to high demand. Rebecca and I got married in a small ceremony with friends and family. We honeymooned in North Queensland, enjoying 2 weeks on the Golden Beaches. After a few weeks on the beach, we got back to our normal routine of work, love, and planning our future. Rebecca agreed to stop taking the birth control pill, and we waited to see what would happen. 9 months later, Sarah was born. 2 years later, we had twins, Henry and Peter, and our last child, Bridget, was born after that. After Bridget, we decided 4 kids were enough, and I had surgery. Our lives were rich and full with the usual family problems, but our home was filled with love. 32 years later, on a crisp winter morning, the kids and I laid Rebecca to rest. She'd fought cancer for 2 years, even in her weakened state. We often lay together, and she needed to feel my love. Baby Rebecca was in pain but alert, so we snuggled together. You're going to be okay. I'm not leaving you alone, I said, stroking her graying blonde hair. Rebecca smiled like Canada, and we both smiled. I remember the blizzard that kept me an hour away from her for 3 weeks. We communicated only via FaceTime, but we managed to smile and communicate. She asked if I would miss her, and I replied, Of course, I'll miss you with all my soul. We ended up lying together, not needing words. After a while, she grabbed my hand and said, I'm scared, baby. She said, her voice quavering. I know there's not much time left. I can feel my body shutting down. Her tears hit my chest. We've been married over 30 years, have 4 children, 6 grandchildren, and another on the way. We've traveled the world together, and now this. I whispered, I'll be here the whole time. I'm not going anywhere. I replied that it's the only thing that gives me strength. The next day, the children came with their families, and we all sat with Rebecca. She was much weaker than before, so we knew her time was near. As her skin lost color, we spent the day reminiscing, laughing, crying, and singing. The kids said their goodbyes. I was sitting by my wife's bedside, holding her in my arms. I told her I loved her, and that I knew our time together was running out. She replied, her eyes closing and her hand brushing against my cheek. It was like our first day together, and we smiled at each other. She pulled me close for a kiss. In that moment, everything else melted away. She looked young and vibrant again, as if she'd never had cancer. We cuddled, my tears soaking the sheets as she slipped away. I felt like a part of myself was lost forever. My family surrounded me and we cried openly. Rebecca, my true love and soulmate, was gone. I knew I'd never be the same without her, but I was also relieved. She was no longer in pain, even though she was gone. I had daily reminders of our life together. Our children were often by my side, and friends like James and Cher were always around. As the months passed, I found joy in my family and friends. If I felt lonely at night, I had countless pictures and videos of Rebecca. To bring me comfort 6 months after Rebecca passed away, I was enjoying coffee at our local cafe when a shadow fell over me. It was an older version of the woman I once loved. I gestured to the seat across from me. Would you care to join me? She hesitated before nodding and sitting down as I studied her. I noticed the wrinkles, gaunt look, and lean body. I hadn't followed her life since that evening on my porch, but it hadn't been easy. How are you? How are you? I asked. Oh, you know, as I get older, my body doesn't react the way it used to. Sometimes I wonder if I should just stay in bed to avoid the pain. She said. I laughed, understanding her sentiment. Jillian smiled, but then grew sadder. I heard about Rebecca. I'm sorry, Greg. She said, genuinely, thank you. I replied, I miss her a lot, but I still think about her all the time. My kids are a lot of work now that Becky's gone. They want to keep me busy and make sure I'm taken care of. Jillian smiled for a moment, but then looked sad again. Do you have kids? I asked. She shook her head, looking down at her coffee with regret. I've never had any. Jillian said, I was married 6 times, but never found anything like what I had with my first boyfriend. I really messed up, didn't I, Greg? She then held up her hand and said, Yes, I know I did. I hurt you badly and blamed you for Troy tricking me into thinking we were soulmates. Every man since then wasn't a match. I thought about the woman in front of me. I'd hated her for a long time, but now I saw a broken, sad woman who'd never found real love. Jill, I said, catching my breath. She looked at me with hope. You need to forgive yourself. Not all 6 marriages could have been as bad as Troy's. Surely a couple of them were. Okay, her eyes lost focus for a moment. You're right. Barry, my 4th husband, was kind and gentle. But after that night with you and Rebecca, I never forgave myself for what I did to you. I wanted to be loved, but I never got over the pain I caused you. She said, looking at me. I know I've said this before, but I'm sorry for what I did to you, Greg. Jill, I'm sorry. Thank you, Greg. I accept your apology. Greg, do you think she started off unsure as we stood to leave? I smiled and shook my head. No, I'm sorry, Jillian. I love my wife too much. I know you loved Rebecca, but she's gone, she said, searching for the right words. I held up my hand. Jillian, Becca, and I were only separated for a short time, until I still love her as much as I did when we first met. I would never cheat on my wife. I told her that my words had really affected Jillian, and she nodded slowly. Then she asked, We'll see, and I replied, We'll see. I waited another 10 years until a stroke took me on Saturday afternoon. Sarah and Bridget were nearby. We were having lunch when I sat down to watch TV. I didn't feel any pain, just tiredness. Then I closed my eyes, and the next thing I knew, I felt arms around my waist and realized Rebecca was hugging me. Becca, I asked, is it okay, baby? It's your time. She told me the kids. You haven't noticed how much you've slowed down in the last month, but they have, she said. This is real, isn't it? It is, I replied. It's real. If it is, what a way to go, kissing your wife until your last breath, she said, laughing and pulling me close to kiss me. No, it's real, I said. Look, the girls are coming. We watched my family gather and cry, but there was laughter too. They shared stories about Rebecca and me laughing and crying together. Rebecca and I stood with our arms around each other, proud of our strong family, when the paramedics took my body away. Rebecca and I hugged and kissed the kids, knowing it was a long time before we saw them again. They didn't notice us at all. There was just a slight movement of air. Come on, baby, Rebecca said, wiping her tears. I have so much to show you. We have a lot of love to make up for. Do I have to go to God or something? I asked. Well, yeah. He's waiting for you, but don't worry. He's a good guy. I smiled. I paused to take her in. She looked as she did before we conceived. Sarah and I looked about the same too. Wait, there's entertainment in heaven, I asked Rebecca. She smiled, her eyes blazing, grabbed my hand and pulled me along. Come and find out my true love, she said with sensuality in her voice. Come and find out.